Attorney General Bill Barr going over the Mueller report as we speak. He could deliver a summary to Congress in the next couple of hours. Exactly how much of that report ultimately makes it to the public eye is up to the Attorney General. Robert Driscoll is a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush. Robert, thank you for coming on the program today. We are awaiting that report. Who knows when it'll actually be released, and who knows how much of it we'll actually see. We know that the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General are huddled inside the Department of Justice right now. What can you tell us about the process right now before they actually release the findings of the report?
Well, I think what everyone needs to remember is that now that the special counsel is complete with his job, this becomes like any other DOJ investigation. And I think that Attorney General Barr and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein are going to be very careful to follow normal DOJ procedures in terms of withholding and redacting what is normally withheld and redacted. But particularly because you look back at Jim Comey, what got him in trouble was he deviated from department policy because he thought, well, this case is so hot, people will need to know that we really looked at Hillary closely and she did all these bad things, even though we're not indicting her. And that ended up creating problems for him with both sides politically. And I think in retrospect, the department looks at that and says, you know, the better answer is, regardless of the political pressure, do what you would normally do. And in a case like this, they'll protect all the 6E information, they'll protect sources and methods, and they will try to spare innocent people from getting smeared with uncorroborated allegations from the report.
But as we know, there are calls, bipartisan calls, for the report to be released in its entirety. Is that possible?
Not under department procedure. It shouldn't be. I mean, if the department declines to indict someone, the general, you either indict and go to trial or you shut up. I mean, that's generally the rule. You don't let the public know. I mean, if people take a step back, the entire reason you have an independent counsel is because you want someone trusted to be looking at all this sensitive information, and people will, at the end of the day, respect his conclusions without necessarily needing to go through every piece of paper that he went through. That's, in general, the point. Now, I understand there's a lot of political pressure here, but I think the department should stand up to that pressure and do what they would normally do in terms of release what they can release without violating department policies and norms.
But as we know, Jerry Nadler, the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, not only is he demanding that the entire report be made public, but he's also demanding the underlying evidence.
Right.
Can that happen?
It generally shouldn't. I mean, there may be underlying evidence that's not protected, but most of this evidence, or a lot of this evidence, would have been secured through grand jury testimony, which is protected by federal law under Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E. A lot of this evidence, will have to do with classified information or classified sources, and a lot of the evidence will have to do with people who aren't going to be indicted or charged and may reflect badly on them. And in general, the department should not be releasing those kinds of evidence. I mean, the thought from the Democrats in the House, and I understand their desire to look at everything, but the thought that they're going to look at the same evidence that Mueller just looked at, come to a different conclusion, and that that's going to have any credibility as compared to Mueller, though criticized, I think, is generally regarded well by both sides of the aisle, doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that there's a lot of pressure on the department, but I think if the department learned anything from the Jim Comey fiasco, it's follow the rules, follow the standard procedure, and even if you get a lot of heat for it, do what you would normally do in a typical prosecution.
Robert, as you said earlier, this is a good time to take a step back as we await the initial findings, the results of this investigation, and look at the scope of the investigation, why it was launched and why it happened to begin with. 2 years, direct expenses totaling $25 million, lots of resources thrown at this investigation. Did you ever see it go beyond the scope of the probe?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what the scope of the probe was because the special counsel had the ability to go to the Deputy Attorney General and ask to expand the scope of the probe if he needed to in certain areas. And my understanding of the original scope of the probe was Russian interference with the election and essentially collusion with members of the Trump campaign and issues related to the investigation. So I think that the false statements and things like that are clearly within scope. Anything having to do with the election in Russia was clearly in scope. So I don't think that the independent counsel, or the special counsel, sorry, was running amok. I understand the president's frustration and other people's, but I think he was doing the best job he could. And again, I think that he was trying, as the department's going to try to do now, to follow the rules as closely as possible, regardless of where the politics would take him.
Robert, finally, we know, as I pointed out, we just had a live look there outside the DOJ. We know they're inside the DOJ, the AG and the deputy AG.
Right.
And we know that William Barr said publicly that he's going to seek the advice and the guidance of Robert Mueller himself on what to make public and release here. So again, what is that process like? If you could just kind of give us some sort of color as to what's happening inside the DOJ right now.
Well, I suspect that one of the reasons you'd talk to the special counsel is to find out what evidence is supporting certain conclusions you make and whether or not there's any problem with releasing that evidence. Some witnesses are reluctant to come forward and have certain agreements of confidentiality. Some you may have only heard from in the grand jury, in which case that testimony couldn't be released. Some you may have overlapping evidence, some of which may be protected and some which may not be. And so I think that what needs to happen is DOJ is probably sitting down with people from the special counsel's office to say, okay, you concluded X, what are the documents and testimony supporting X, and which of that can we release or not?
Well, the wait is on, that is for sure. Robert Driscoll, we appreciate that insight as we await the report. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.